Simon Cowell was known globally as a judge who built his reputation on blunt honesty, sharp critiques, and an uncompromising approach to talent. For years, his life appeared to revolve entirely around television shows, music production, and business expansion. He was rarely associated with softness or emotional vulnerability. That perception began to shift when fatherhood entered his life in a way he had never anticipated. The arrival of his son Eric marked a profound turning point, reshaping his identity beyond fame and work. What had once been a tightly controlled world of schedules and public appearances slowly became centered on something far more personal. The transition was not immediate or effortless. It unfolded gradually as Simon learned to adjust his priorities. His focus shifted from audience reactions and industry success to the more delicate and unpredictable rhythm of raising a child. In this new role, he began to discover aspects of life he had previously overlooked, including patience, emotional awareness, and unconditional attachment. Fatherhood introduced him to a deeper sense of responsibility, one that extended beyond career ambition. It became the foundation of a new chapter where personal connection mattered more than public recognition, altering the direction of his life in lasting ways. The early days of a new family and emotional awakening. When Eric was born, Simon Cowell's world changed in ways he had never fully prepared for. Despite his long-standing independence and structured lifestyle, the arrival of his son created an immediate emotional shift. Naming Eric after Simon's late father added a layer of significance, connecting generations through memory and legacy. The early days of fatherhood were filled with adjustment as Simon navigated unfamiliar responsibilities. Simple routines such as feeding, sleeping schedules, and early bonding experiences became central to his daily life. Unlike his previous lifestyle, which prioritized professional obligations, these moments required presence and attention. Simon began to experience emotional depth that surprised even those closest to him. The initial uncertainty he had once felt about becoming a parent slowly transformed into attachment and commitment. Each interaction with Eric reinforced a growing sense of purpose. Over time, Simon's identity expanded beyond entertainment executive and television personality into that of a devoted father. This shift did not erase his career, but it redefined its importance. Work remained part of his life, but it no longer dominated it. Instead, it coexisted with a new emotional foundation built around his son, marking the beginning of a more grounded and reflective phase in his journey. Noticing early differences and the search for understanding. As Eric grew older, Simon Cowell began to observe subtle differences in his development that gradually drew his attention. While many children begin speaking and engaging verbally at an early age, Eric's communication followed a different pattern. At first, Simon tried not to overinterpret these signs, reminding himself that children develop at varying speeds. However, as time passed, the differences became more noticeable. Eric often communicated in ways that did not rely on words, instead using behavior, gestures, and reactions to express himself. Simon's natural instinct to analyze and understand patterns led him to reflect more deeply on what he was observing. He began researching child development, reading extensively, and seeking advice from others. Despite reassurance from friends and professionals that variation in development is common, Simon's concern persisted. It was not rooted in fear, but in a desire to understand his son more fully. Nights often became moments of reflection, where he quietly considered Eric's future and the kind of support he might need. This period marked the beginning of a journey toward awareness, where uncertainty slowly evolved into the search for clarity and understanding, rather than immediate answers or conclusions. A holiday that revealed hidden challenges. A family holiday when Eric was 4 years old became a turning point in Simon Cowell's understanding of his son's needs. What was intended to be a relaxing and joyful experience quickly became overwhelming for Eric. The environment, filled with unfamiliar sounds, constant movement, and sensory stimulation, created visible distress. Simon initially attributed these reactions to normal childhood adjustment, but the intensity and consistency of Eric's discomfort suggested something deeper. Loud music, crowded spaces, and unpredictable routines appeared to overwhelm him in ways that were difficult to manage. One evening, the situation reached a clear breaking point when Eric became visibly distressed in a busy dining area, overwhelmed by noise and activity. This moment prompted Simon and Lauren Silverman to reconsider their assumptions and seek professional guidance. It was not a decision made out of panic but out of responsibility. They recognized that understanding Eric's experience required expert insight. This holiday, while intended as a break from routine, instead revealed patterns that could no longer be ignored. It marked the beginning of a more structured and informed approach to understanding Eric's behavior, ultimately leading them toward formal evaluation and support. The diagnosis that redefined perspective. After consultations with specialists and a series of evaluations, Simon Cowell and Lauren Silverman received the diagnosis that would redefine their understanding of Eric's development. Autism spectrum disorder was identified as the framework explaining his communication style, sensory responses, and behavioral patterns. While the diagnosis did not come as a complete shock, it provided clarity that replaced uncertainty. The explanation helped align many of the observations Simon had made over time, turning scattered questions into a coherent understanding. Professionals described both the challenges and strengths associated with Eric's condition, emphasizing that his development followed a unique trajectory rather than a deficient one. Simon was introduced to the idea that differences in processing, communication, and sensory experience were part of a broader neurological variation. This perspective shifted his mindset from concern to adaptation. Instead of focusing on limitations, attention moved toward support strategies and environmental adjustments. The diagnosis became a foundation for planning rather than a conclusion. It reframed Eric's future not as restricted, but as requiring tailored guidance. For Simon, this moment marked the beginning of active learning, where understanding replaced speculation and practical steps replaced uncertainty, building a structured world for growth and comfort. Following the diagnosis, Simon Cowell began restructuring his lifestyle and home environment to better support Eric's needs. The focus shifted toward creating consistency, predictability, and sensory comfort. In their home, adjustments were made to reduce overwhelming stimuli, including softer lighting, controlled sound levels, and carefully selected materials. Every aspect of the environment was considered in terms of how it might affect Eric's comfort and sense of security. Daily routines became highly structured, with predictable patterns that helped Eric feel more at ease. Therapy sessions were integrated into the weekly schedule, including speech and occupational support designed to encourage communication and independence. Simon also adapted his professional commitments, reducing travel and prioritizing time at home. This restructuring required significant change in his lifestyle, but it became essential to maintaining balance. Over time, these adjustments created a stable environment where Eric could develop at his own pace. The process was not about restriction, but about adaptation and support. Simon's role evolved into that of both father and active participant in Eric's developmental journey, ensuring that his surroundings contributed positively to growth and emotional well-being. Emotional adjustment and redefining expectations of parenthood. As Simon Cowell settled into his role as a father to a child with different developmental needs, he experienced a gradual emotional transformation. The expectations he once held about fatherhood began to shift as reality unfolded in unexpected ways. Instead of traditional milestones, progress was measured in smaller, meaningful achievements. Moments such as improved communication, increased engagement, or simple expressions of connection became deeply significant. Simon learned to interpret Eric's behavior with greater sensitivity, recognizing that communication extended beyond words. This required patience and a willingness to let go of preconceived ideas about parenting. Emotional adjustment also involved confronting internal expectations that no longer applied. Rather than viewing differences as obstacles, Simon began to see them as part of Eric's identity. This shift allowed him to appreciate his son more fully without comparison to external standards. The process was not without difficulty, as it required continuous adaptation and reflection. However, it ultimately led to a deeper and more authentic understanding of parenthood. Through this journey, Simon discovered that meaningful connection is not defined by conventional measures, but by presence, acceptance, and consistent emotional support. A father learning to communicate without words. As time passed, Simon Cowell began to understand that connecting with Eric required a different kind of communication than what he was used to in his professional life. In television and business, communication is direct, verbal, and immediate. With Eric, it was quieter, slower, and often nonverbal. Simon learned to interpret facial expressions, body language, and subtle behavioral cues that revealed how Eric was feeling. This adjustment took patience, because it meant slowing down and observing rather than reacting quickly. Over time, these nonverbal exchanges became meaningful in their own right. A glance, a gesture, or a moment of shared attention carried emotional weight that words might normally express. Simon also learned that forcing communication could create stress, while allowing space encouraged comfort and trust. This new understanding reshaped their relationship in a profound way. Instead of trying to guide Eric into a typical communication pattern, Simon focused on meeting him where he was. That shift created a more natural bond between them. It was not about correcting differences, but about understanding them, and through that understanding, building a form of connection that felt authentic and deeply personal. Navigating daily life with structure and consistency. As Eric grew, Simon Cowell placed increasing importance on structure in daily life, recognizing that predictability helped his son feel secure. Routines were not treated as rigid rules but as supportive frameworks that reduced stress and uncertainty. Mornings, meals, therapy sessions, and leisure time were arranged in a way that followed consistent patterns. This structure extended to transitions between activities, which were often carefully planned to avoid sudden changes that could overwhelm Eric. Even seemingly small decisions, such as adjusting travel plans or modifying social events, were made with Eric's comfort in mind. Over time, this approach created a stable environment where Eric could engage more confidently with the world around him. Simon also learned to anticipate situations that might be challenging and prepare accordingly rather than reacting afterward. This proactive mindset became a key part of parenting in their household. While it required effort and constant attention, it also reduced uncertainty for Eric and allowed him to explore new experiences at his own pace. The emphasis on structure was not about limitation, but about creating a foundation from which growth, learning, and emotional stability could naturally develop. The emotional weight of expectations and letting go. One of the most profound internal challenges Simon Cowell faced was letting go of expectations he had once held about fatherhood. Before Eric's diagnosis, Simon had unconsciously imagined certain milestones, conversations, and shared experiences that many parents anticipate. Over time, he realized that clinging to these expectations created emotional tension that did not reflect Eric's reality. Letting go of those assumptions became an important emotional process. Instead of focusing on what he thought fatherhood should look like, Simon began focusing on what it actually was. This shift allowed him to appreciate smaller, quieter moments that carried meaning in their own way. Progress was no longer measured by comparison, but by individual growth. At times, this adjustment brought feelings of sadness for the imagined future he had once pictured. However, it also opened space for acceptance and deeper understanding. Simon began to value presence over prediction, choosing to engage fully with the moment rather than projecting into the future. This emotional transition became one of the most significant parts of his journey, reshaping not only his relationship with Eric but also his broader understanding of life and fulfillment. Building patience through therapy and daily progress therapy became a central part of Eric's development, and Simon Cowell found himself actively involved in the process. Speech therapy, occupational therapy, and behavioral support sessions became regular elements of their weekly routine. These sessions required patience, repetition, and consistent encouragement. Progress was often gradual, with small improvements carrying significant meaning. A new word, improved focus, or better response to sensory input was celebrated as a milestone. Simon attended many of these sessions, observing carefully and learning from professionals about how to support Eric outside of structured therapy environments. Over time, he began to understand that progress in Eric's case was not linear. Some days showed advancement, while others required revisiting earlier steps. This required a mindset that valued persistence over speed. Simon also learned how to reinforce therapeutic strategies at home, ensuring continuity between sessions and daily life. The process demanded emotional resilience, as outcomes were not always immediate or predictable. However, it also created a deeper connection between father and son, as shared effort became a form of communication and trust. Through therapy, Simon gained not only practical tools but also a renewed appreciation for patience as a form of love and support, acceptance, growth, and finding meaning in difference. As the years progressed, Simon Cowell reached a deeper level of acceptance regarding Eric's development and the path their lives had taken. Acceptance did not arrive suddenly. It developed through countless daily experiences, adjustments, and emotional realizations. What once felt uncertain gradually became familiar, and what once seemed overwhelming became manageable through structure and understanding. Simon began to see Eric not through the lens of comparison, but as an individual with his own rhythm and way of engaging with the world. This perspective shift changed the emotional tone of their relationship. Instead of focusing on what was absent compared to typical expectations, Simon started recognizing what was present: curiosity, focus, affection, and unique ways of expressing connection. This recognition allowed him to find meaning in experiences that others might overlook. Growth became a shared journey rather than a fixed destination. Both father and son adapted to each other, learning through observation, patience, and repetition. Over time, Simon's understanding of parenting expanded into something more reflective and grounded. He began to appreciate that difference was not a limitation in itself, but a variation of human experience that required empathy, consistency, and respect to truly understand. A life reshaped by love, responsibility, and perspective. Looking at Simon Cowell's journey as a whole, it becomes clear that fatherhood reshaped every major aspect of his life. The sharp-edged public persona that defined his early career gradually evolved into a more reflective and emotionally aware presence. This transformation was not driven by public opinion or professional change, but by the quiet, continuous responsibility of caring for his son. Eric's presence redefined Simon's priorities, influencing how he spent his time, how he made decisions, and how he understood purpose. Love became the central force guiding his choices, often outweighing ambition or convenience. Responsibility took on a new meaning, one that extended beyond provision to emotional presence and long-term support. Perspective also shifted, as Simon gained insight into experiences outside his own. He became more aware of differences in human development and more conscious of the importance of acceptance in society. While challenges remained, they were met with greater understanding and resilience. Ultimately, Simon's journey reflects a broader truth about parenthood. It has the power to reshape identity, soften assumptions, and reveal forms of strength that are not visible in public success, but deeply rooted in personal commitment and care. Privacy, protection, and managing public curiosity. As awareness of Eric's condition grew, Simon Cowell became increasingly focused on protecting his son's privacy. Being a public figure meant that curiosity about his personal life was constant, but Simon drew clear boundaries regarding what he was willing to share. He understood that while public interest was natural, Eric's well-being had to remain the priority. This led to a careful balance between acknowledging reality and limiting exposure. Simon avoided revealing unnecessary personal details and discouraged speculation about his son's development. At the same time, he recognized that complete silence could lead to misunderstanding, which is why he chose to speak selectively when needed. Managing this balance required constant judgment, especially in an age where information spreads quickly and widely. The goal was not to control public narrative, but to ensure that Eric was not defined by external assumptions. Simon's approach reflected a broader philosophy of parenting in the public eye. Visibility should never come at the cost of a child's emotional safety. This protective stance became a consistent part of how he navigated media attention, reinforcing the idea that family boundaries remain essential even in high-profile lives. Redefining success beyond fame and career. Over time, Simon Cowell's definition of success began to shift significantly. For much of his life, success had been measured through professional achievement, ratings, influence, and industry impact. However, fatherhood introduced a different perspective. Milestones in Eric's development began to carry more emotional weight than career accomplishments. A meaningful interaction, a breakthrough in communication, or a moment of shared understanding became sources of fulfillment that rivaled professional success. This shift did not mean that Simon abandoned his career, but rather that he rebalanced its importance. Work became something he engaged in alongside fatherhood, not above it. This change also influenced how he viewed ambition and long-term goals. Instead of focusing solely on expansion or recognition, he began prioritizing stability, presence, and emotional connection. The experience challenged long-held assumptions about what it means to live a successful life. In this new framework, success was no longer defined by external validation but by internal satisfaction and the well-being of his son. This redefinition marked one of the most significant transformations in Simon's life, shaping how he approached both his personal and professional decisions moving forward. The private struggles behind public perception. While Simon Cowell remained a highly visible public figure, much of his personal journey with Eric unfolded away from public view. The contrast between his public image and private responsibilities became more pronounced over time. On television, he continued to appear confident and composed, but behind the scenes, he was navigating a deeply personal and evolving family situation. This separation between public perception and private reality created pressure, as Simon had to manage both roles simultaneously. He chose not to publicly disclose many details about Eric's development initially, preferring to protect his son's privacy. However, this also meant that outside observers often misunderstood or speculated about their situation. Media attention occasionally focused on surface-level interpretations rather than lived experience. Despite this, Simon remained committed to maintaining boundaries between his professional identity and his role as a father. The private nature of their journey allowed Eric to grow without unnecessary exposure, while also giving Simon space to adapt as a parent. This balance between visibility and privacy became an essential part of how he navigated life, ensuring that family remained protected even as public curiosity continued to grow. Speaking out and facing public misunderstanding. As time went on, increasing public curiosity about Eric led Simon Cowell to make the decision to speak more openly about his son's autism diagnosis. This step was not taken lightly, as Simon had always been protective of his family's privacy. However, growing speculation and misinterpretation made silence difficult to maintain. When he eventually addressed the situation publicly, his intention was to encourage understanding and reduce stigma. He emphasized that Eric was a happy child who experienced the world differently, and that this difference required awareness rather than judgment. The response from the public was mixed. Many people expressed support and appreciation for his honesty, while others continued to misunderstand or oversimplify the topic. Despite this, the conversation marked an important shift in visibility for autism in mainstream media discussions. Simon did not use the moment for publicity, but rather to clarify misconceptions and promote empathy. Even after speaking out, he remained cautious about sharing personal details, ensuring that Eric's privacy was still respected. This balance between openness and protection became a defining aspect of how he handled public engagement moving forward, reinforcing his role as both a father and a public advocate for understanding.